today. Some of you may have read in the paper or heard on KMOX or other media reports a little bit about the effort that we're doing and the idea of landing air freight cargo planes at Lambert. But this effort goes much farther than that. The goal of this is really twofold. Number one is to establish a Chinese air hub in St. Louis, but then to use that new direct mode of transporting goods and personnel to develop a Chinese commercialization center. We're really on two tracks to do that. And then what we're trying to develop is a place where Chinese businesses can establish regional offices or North American headquarters to promote business development with American businesses interested in expanding into markets in the Far East. Now that's the long-term goal, and it's going to take a while to get there. I always like to caution people when you're going after a big target like we are, it sometimes takes a long time to get there. My background is in government work in international economic development with Senator Bond's office, and oftentimes, especially with Asian countries, it takes longer than you think to develop the relationships, to get to a place where they are willing to enter into negotiations and contracts, to actually get down to the fundamentals of business.
Here's the basic pitch. China needs to look at the United States as three distinct markets. When a business typically enters the United States, or in this case, a country, begins doing business in the United States, typically they establish themselves, not surprisingly, on the east and west coasts and largely ignore the middle part of the country. We're saying you need to look at the United States as three distinct markets: East Coast, West Coast, and then the middle part of the country, which we'll define in just a minute. The way to do that is to first come in to penetrate the market through a substantial air cargo hub, develop that out through relationships, and build a commercial hub and a commercial center that you've heard us talk about. And then last but not least, and not surprisingly, we think St. Louis is exactly the place that you should do this. This really follows several macro trends that have to do with the economy and falling dollar and, at the time, rising fuel prices, but it also has very much to do with the change in demographics and wealth within the Chinese economy and the growing affluence of the Chinese consumer and their demand for higher value-added goods. It has a lot to do with changes that are going on in supply chain logistics and how you can avoid massive inventories by flying some high-value goods rather than putting them on a boat for 10 to 14 weeks. And it also has an awful lot to do with the fact that 80% of the goods that fly from China to the United States fly on non-Chinese carriers. At some point, that will change, and we want to be there when they tell FedEx and UPS, "Thanks, guys, we got it, we'll take it from here." Here is our definition, and it's very generous, I understand, but when we talk about the middle part of the country, here's what we talk about. And this one slide is probably the primary basis of the argument. That the middle part of the United States, obviously, I grew up in Missouri. I understand this is a very broad definition of the Midwest. There's a rationale to it, though. If you put St. Louis, if you put a dot on St. Louis, and then did a radius that's 600 miles, 1,000 kilometers, which is basically one day's truck drive, you get just about all of these states. And then, being a good Chamber of Commerce person, we kind of got the northeast corner of Texas, so we just rounded up and just took the whole state. Actually, it has to do with the fact that the data that we present is only available to statewide level. So and you'll see we do back down and become a little more realistic. But this is how we define the heartland of America. It's a region that in size is basically equivalent to India, in population equal to Japan. It's got 40% of the U.S. GDP, nearly half of the Fortune 500 companies headquartered within this region, over half of the U.S. manufacturing output, nearly half of the agricultural product. And then you can see, the rest of the statistics, or maybe you can't. Some of you are pretty far off. But then the bottom line is also very important. 30% of the goods that in 2007 were shipped from the United States to China by air originated in these states. You then begin to build a distribution pattern. We say it's no coincidence that the major expediters, FedEx, UPS, DHL, back when they were still playing that role, all located in sort of the heartland of America. St. Louis then becomes the closest metropolitan area to both the mean and the median population centers of the United States. You can take that down to the next level and look at certain distribution centroids that, as well as the population centers, continue to move further west and south and closer to St. Louis. You look at what's called the Great Circle Route. Aviators will tell you that this is the most efficient route to fly from Asia to the United States, just happens to land right in St. Louis. And those of us who are from here understand this line of prevailing weather. That means that you're going to have a lot fewer disruptions and weather delays if you're located on the western side of that band of weather that goes from the southwest to the northeast. This is when we then get a lot more realistic from that 20-state swath down the middle of the country. When we start building the case then for air cargo, obviously they understand, and we can build a very credible case about flying goods into St. Louis and distributing out from here. The heart of the matter, and we've always known that this is what it was going to come down to, was whether we could fill the planes going back. So we are just now in the process of proving up that business case. But to be very conservative and very realistic, we have proposed this pear-shaped geography as our phase 1 catchment area, that we think this is the region that we could realistically expect to draw goods from to a St. Louis base to ship back to China. We then have been very busy trying to prove it, and I'll have 2 last slides on that before, this was a summary that we worked. Really trying to tell Chinese that we believe this is a solution that works for them economically, politically, and strategically from a supply chain and a logistics standpoint, and seem to get a lot of buy-in into that.
Just quickly, from our perspective, this initiative is in many ways a response, a very aggressive response to an already growing trade relationship between Missouri and China. For those of you that don't know, in 2 years alone, 05 to 07, our trade from Missouri to China more than doubled, from $500 million to over $1 billion. So we see this initiative as just one aggressive step to a long-term effort to increase that trade, but also to do, as Stephen said in that video, China companies are going to globalize. China companies are looking for investment opportunities throughout the world, and we want them to consider St. Louis as the right location for some of that investment.